Well, let's move on to the Premier League reaction from the weekend. James, you were at Villa Park for Arsenal against Aston Villa. We're going to go through this in kind of chronological order, obviously, because Arsenal played and then City played. Arsenal was the early game. You were there. First, what did you make of the result, the performance, and also like the manner of which it all happened?
Well, I think to some extent they've had this come in. There's a couple of contexts you can put this in, and one of them's sort of more positive and one of them's a bit more negative. To be kind to them, this has come at the end of a 2-week period in which they played Tottenham, Bayern Munich, Chelsea, Brentford, and then go to Villa Park in the early game in that Wednesday night, Saturday lunchtime turnaround that Jurgen Klopp used to absolutely despise. So you can have some sympathy with them feeling a little bit jaded. And I wrote on Wednesday after the Brentford game that I thought they looked a bit ragged in the second half, and a couple of the players, people like Declan Rice, who just played so much, just looked like they were blowing quite hard at the end of that game and not quite out on their feet, but the pace of the schedule had caught up with them a little bit. And I thought we saw that in the first half in particular at Villa Park, when obviously they went behind. They were 1-0 down at half time. Arteta makes 2 changes at half time, brings on Gyökeres and Trossard, and they look great for sort of 20 minutes. They equalise. Everything's going down the right. Saka's just a constant sort of menace down that right-hand side, causing Villa all sorts of problems. And you think, okay, they've responded here. They're going to go and win the game. And then the sort of third phase of the match, the final kind of 15, 20 minutes, Villa wrestle back control of it. And we should say Villa, of course, played in midweek as well, so that, they had plenty of football in their legs as well. But they just wrestle back control, the initiative, and the winning goal, which just a fantastic moment just to be in Villa Park for that. I've not heard a stadium that loud for some time, but in many ways, the manner of that winning goal sort of epitomised the whole afternoon, which is sort of Villa kind of trying, chipping away, throwing everything at them, never giving up, and finally the ball falls in the right place for Emi Buendia and he kills it into the net, and the place goes crazy. So, it has felt as though this has been coming for Arsenal for a little bit of time because of the schedule, but also because of the injuries. It was the 6th different centre-back partnership they've had this season, and we all know when Saliba and Gabriel aren't playing, they're not as solid as the back. That's not a criticism of the players who come in. It's just that those two are the best centre-back pairing in the league at the moment. And it's just been a shift, I think, away from when the Fulham game popped into my mind sort of about 6 weeks ago, where they went 1-0 up. Again, that was a Trossard goal that day, sort of early in the second half, similar kind of time, actually. And then Fulham, not only did they not equalise, but they didn't have a shot for the rest of the game. That's how well Arsenal were defending and controlling matches. Whereas Villa had, I think they created the highest expected goals figure against Arsenal in any game this season. And that was also the case before half-time. They had the highest at half-time as well. And so all afternoon, Villa were causing Arsenal problems. They didn't really ever fully have control of the game, aside from maybe that 15, 20-minute period after half-time. And when you're living with defined margins like that, sometimes they go for you, as they have done for Arsenal a few times this season, most obviously Newcastle away when they scored right at the death to win that game 2-1. And this game could have gone their way too, but sometimes it will go against you. And obviously that Buendia moment was fantastic for Villa and fantastic for Manchester City up the M6.
We'll move on to the title race, what it means for the title race and Man City. But just in terms of Arsenal's result, will Arteta be looking at that and be worried about a wider pattern that is emerging, or will he look at it and go, well, it was a blip, we played a great team away from home, these things happen in the Premier League? Do you think there'll be wider worry with Arteta that this is a sign of things to come?
I mean, he put a brave face on it afterwards. He was quite defiant. I sort of said to him, a lot is going to be made off the back of this, with the title race tightening up, and how confident are you that the players can deal with those ups and downs? And he said, well, we've dealt with it for 5 months without a problem, so we just have to go and do that again. And you sort of think, well, yeah, fair enough, they have, and they've had their injuries, but they've not really had anybody over their shoulder. This is the first sort of week really where City have kind of put them under any kind of pressure, and it showed, I thought, a little bit in the Brentford game, and it certainly showed again at Villa Park. Now, he'll probably say, well, look, this is a consequence of the schedule, and clearly they've got another big away game ticked off, albeit not in a positive way, but they've now been to Old Trafford, they've been to St James's Park, they've been to Anfield, they've now been to Villa Park. They're ticking off a lot of these big away games. So for the second half of the season, the run-in for them should be a little bit kinder and offer a schedule that, you know, enables them to go on a kind of consistent run to go and win the league. And they've been to all those places. They've had all these injuries and all these difficult things to deal with, and they're still 2 points clear at the top of the table. That's kind of the spin he's putting on it. The sort of flip side of that, though, is that the one thing we don't know about this Arsenal team is, do they have the mentality to see it out when the pressure reaches its maximum? Now, we're not going to know that until March, April, May. And we were thinking that maybe, 2-3 weeks ago, they might be so far clear by then that it won't matter. What I think we're seeing at the moment is that actually the title race is going to be tighter. And Arsenal aren't necessarily going to be 8, 10, 12 points clear, in early April. And I think it feels, and I know we're going to talk about City in a minute, but it feels as though Guardiola is already kind of playing on that a little bit, because that is the one thing that Arsenal can't answer. They haven't been there and done it. And it's not to say they've bottled it in previous years, but they haven't seen it out. We know that they had a big lead a couple of years ago. In fact, I did think that this game at Villa reminded me of, there was a 12:30 kickoff in February 23 when Arsenal scored twice in stoppage time to win 4-2. And that was the 12:30 game. And then at 3 o'clock, City went to Forest and battered Forest, but somehow didn't put them away. And Chris Wood equalised and they drew 1-1. And it was another one of those sort of days where you felt the plates kind of shifting, and it felt as though that time it was going to be Arsenal's year. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but this kind of had a similar feel, but the opposite way for Arsenal. And they've got to prove that they can handle that. And, that's probably the only remaining question about this Arsenal team now.
Well, let's move on to City then, because it felt like one of those days, didn't it, with Arsenal playing early. The last minute goal goes in, they drop points, and all of a sudden City are playing it immediately after. It's been quite interesting with City in the last couple of weeks, because everything has been quite negative. They lose at home to Bayer Leverkusen because Guardiola's made a load of changes. The press conference after that is negative. They beat Leeds at the Etihad, but only just. And again, there's this kind of negative feel around the post-match stuff about City's defensive issues. Again, against Fulham, the 5-1 up, but end up winning 5-4. Again, afterwards, Guardiola tries to put a brave face on it, but is obviously annoyed about what's happening in the second half. And again, the talk is all about defensive issues. And even on Friday, I was at the Etihad for Pep's pre-match stuff on Friday. And the general theme of the press conference was quite negative, that it was about Rodri and how much they're missing Rodri, the defensive issues, why can't you keep clean sheets? You're conceding goals to teams that you probably shouldn't be conceding goals to. There was an awful lot about the Fulham game, what happened in the second half, how did it go so wrong in the second half? And turning up at the Etihad on Saturday, it did feel to be quite negative. I walked in from the car park from where you get your accreditation, and I could overhear sort of City fans debating the same issues about defensive issues and, are they good enough defensively to beat Sunderland? Could they even beat Sunderland? Are they good enough to beat a Sunderland side who have started the season really well? And then all of a sudden, we're sat in the press seats waiting for kickoff, and there's this massive roar from the concourses because Buendia scored. And even speaking to Josko Vardiol after the game, he said that the City players found out just before they went out to warm up. And he said that it felt a little bit different. You could feel a buzz in the stadium, perhaps a buzz that wouldn't have been there if Arsenal had just gone there and won 3-0 and kind of carried on. And it certainly did feel like that atmosphere lifted the players a little bit. City started quite well. They struggled a little bit at the first half, the first bit of the second half, before they got the third goal to win 3-0. But overall, the entire day felt like one of those days where the momentum just shifts a little bit, and all of a sudden, all this kind of negativity that had been around City for 7-10 days lifted, and all of a sudden you're 2 points behind Arsenal. And the questions, the one that you've just sort of said there, hypothetically, can Arsenal handle the pressure? All the pressure suddenly is back on Arsenal, and Pep Guardiola comes into his post-match press conference afterwards, and he sat there smiling and laughing, talking about Cherki's unbelievable assist and Foden scoring again, and the fact that they're only 2 points behind Arsenal. and everything seems to be different. It did feel just to be like one of those days where the momentum shifts again.
I mean, one of the things about Arsenal I think that they have to deal with is it was really interesting, I thought, that Mourinho started up front ahead of Gyökeres. And I went on their pre-season tour to Singapore and Hong Kong, and a lot of the chat was just around the team at that time, sort of behind the scenes, was we need to change the way that we're playing to get the best out of Gyökeres. We're going to go more direct. We need to be more clinical. And you're going to see a sort of style shift in Arsenal that maybe, you wouldn't have expected prior to all these signings coming in. But I think what we've seen so far this season hasn't really been that. When, they've been prioritising their defence and their defensive resilience and clean sheets and nicking goals where they can. And when they get Gyökeres back fit, he still went with Mourinho, who's been a revelation in that role in recent weeks and has really kind of brought the best out of some of the other attacking players in the team. And it seems as though they're a little bit caught between the team that the signings were supposed to make them and the team that they were last season. Because the team they were last season was so close to winning the league, but they fell short because they weren't clinical in the final third. They weren't turning those draws into wins. And they've been doing that a little bit more this season with some late goals. But because the margins have been so fine and because they haven't had, Gyökeres has not come in and scored 10 goals already and matching kind of Haaland's numbers or even Igor Thiago's numbers at Brentford, that they haven't evolved enough. Do you see in City, because we've often talked on this pod about, it's basically Haaland versus Arsenal. Did you see on Saturday, obviously he didn't score, are they evolving beyond that now? Are they becoming a team that's not just reliant on Haaland? Is he starting to solve that problem?
I don't think they're solving the issue of wanting everything to go through Haaland. I think that the team still is set up in a way that wants to create chances for Haaland. I think what perhaps we saw on Saturday is that they don't need him to score. There was the game at Newcastle a couple of weeks ago. Haaland has a big chance early on at 0-0 and misses, and you felt like if that goes in, that City probably go on to win that game. But Newcastle find a way other than that to kind of keep Haaland quiet, and there wasn't really much else happening apart from a couple of chances that Foden had. On Saturday, Haaland had one chance that was cleared off the line in the second half, but they did look an awful lot more threatening. Foden is back playing probably towards a level that saw him get the Premier League's best player of the Player of the Year award a couple of years ago. Doku looks far better this season. His end product is far better than it has been the last couple of years. Cherky, it's been a little bit of a slow start, but is starting to play more regularly. He's starting to have more of an influence on the game. I mean, the assist for Foden's goal is unbelievable. I just think that maybe the other attacking options that they've got are kind of growing in confidence a little bit more, and you can rely on Foden to nick you a goal or Doku to get you a goal or someone, and it doesn't necessarily matter if Haaland scores or not. And I think that's a massive thing for Guardiola, because a couple of weeks ago he was getting quite concerned that if Haaland didn't score, they weren't scoring at all. Really, the big change in that is Phil Foden, and it's maybe something that I know we have talked about it a lot, but maybe it has gone under the radar a little bit about how far off his form was last year. He's Premier League's best player a couple of years ago. He goes to the Euros, doesn't come back in the same, just looks tired and jaded, and just never really recovered his form last year. But 2 years ago, he got the best part of 20 league goals, which is incredible for an attacking midfielder. If he can get anything like those numbers this year, and he is on his way to those numbers this year, City are a completely different team. And there are issues with City at the back. I don't think, structurally they're the same team that perhaps we've seen in the last couple of years. Diaz looks a little bit shaky sometimes. It's a new centre-half pairing with Diaz and Vardiol. Vardiol's obviously moved from left-back, so that's taking a little bit of time to get used to. But City at the moment look like a team who are capable of scoring 2 or 3 goals every week. And if you can do that, then it doesn't necessarily matter that you're not keeping clean sheets. Obviously, Guardiola would like a lot more control in games because that's his thing, right? I mean, he wants. You just mentioned there that Arsenal had a game the other week where the Fulham, I think, didn't have a shot on target or a shot on goal, and that's exactly the kind of game that Guardiola likes. But I just think that City are the top scorers in the Premier League, and if you can go through go through weeks where you're scoring 2, 3, 4 goals every week, then it doesn't necessarily matter. And I think for Arsenal, I think having City on their shoulder, as well as they've done, will be a worry for Arsenal. And I know that we've had that conversation before. You've talked about Arsenal's mentality and can they kind of handle the pressure. Well, a point that you made on the pod a couple of weeks ago, City don't lose title races that they're in, that they either win the league or they're so far off it that they're never in the race at all. We haven't yet seen a Pep Guardiola team beaten in a title race.
No. And I mean, what I would say, I think Arsenal, that 22-23 season, I think they just ran out of legs, really. They were relying then on Saka and Odegaard just doing it week after week after week. The squad is totally different now, and there'll be an expectation that, that Eze and Noni Madueke and these players they've brought in to kind of share that creative attacking burden will be able to maintain that consistency when the pressure comes. I mean, just on Foden, I mean, I know he's talked publicly about Gareth Southgate's use of him at the Euros last summer and not being able to show his best out wide and those kind of problems that he has. Yeah, to the same extent, do we need to give Thomas Tuchel a bit of credit for his revival at the moment? Because he really has brought into sharp focus this idea that Foden, Kane and Bellingham cannot play in the same team for England. That's what he said. Do you feel as though that's been the catalyst for him, or is it something else to do with City and something closer to home?
No, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think Tuchel's handled him quite well, really. I mean, he allowed him not to go and join up for those June games before the Club World Cup. I think everyone kind of recognised that Foden was struggling with fatigue last season as much as anything. I think that he had a couple of niggling injuries that he never really recovered from. I think at City, it's coincided a little bit with Kevin De Bruyne moving on. Towards the end of his City career, he was in and out anyway because of injuries. But now Foden is the main man. He's playing centrally more often than not than he has been out wide. I think he's kind of thriving with that responsibility that Pep has given him. And I think, again, I've just said there that Tuchel's handled him quite well. I think that Pep has as well. I think that he's not just kind of tried to stick him in again and again and again if things haven't gone well. He's taking him out if he feels like he's lacking that little bit of energy. And right now it seems like he's paying off because as much as you talk about last season how many issues City were dealing with no Rodri, losing Foden, not necessarily his body, but his kind of his output on what he had generated the year before was a massive thing for Pep Guardiola. And I do think that if City go on and can challenge Arsenal and last the course and win the title, that it'll probably be more down to having Phil Foden in form than maybe Erling Haaland, because Erling Haaland is going to score goals probably in any team that he's in. But if you can have an attacking midfielder who's generating 20 goals and 10 assists every season, that sets you apart from the rest of the league. As good as the likes of Saka and Odegaard are, if you've got a midfielder who can generate that kind of output, it makes you a completely different team.
And just finally, we should, I think, touch on the fact that, Aston Villa are 3 points off the lead. Legend of the podcast, Matty Cash, with another tremendous contribution. People, if you've not seen that interview, please go and check it out. Genuinely, he was a joy to listen to, and I thought he was really insightful on Unai Emery and life at Villa. Chelsea, we were talking about Chelsea sort of last week, I think, about whether they were in the title race or not. Is it a two-horse race, Rob? Could you see Villa sustaining this, or Chelsea sort of getting themselves back into the picture, or are we really just talking about Arsenal and City now?
Yeah, I'm going to be careful what I say here, because I think 2 weeks ago I said that Chelsea were in it, and I can't say that they're out of it after 2 weeks. I think a lot of the title race comes down to mentality, and I think Chelsea can beat anyone on their day. I think Villa can as well. I doubt whether they have got the level of consistency that you need to win a Premier League title. I'm not even sure that this City team can do it. It's been interesting in the last couple of weeks that in press conferences, people have kind of nudged Guardiola to say that they can chase down Arsenal, and he's taken a step back from that. He perhaps realises that this isn't the same City squad that he's had when they won 4 in a row. You know, there's no Gundogan, there's no Walker, there's no Edison, no De Bruyne. Taken out an awful lot of experience out of that squad, and it's almost as if he's kind of waiting to see whether this group has the same mentality as the old group. And so he doesn't really want to start needling Arsenal about their mentality because he's not entirely sure about his own group yet. So in terms of the title race in general, I do think it's a 2-horse race. I think that Chelsea and Villa will have a big say in where the title ends up. I just don't think that they've got the squad depth or the experience or the level of consistency to go and win 10 on the bounce that City and Arsenal have. I still think it's probably in Arsenal's hands, and I think probably the last word should go to you about whether, I know it's still very early, we're early December, but right now, do you sense that this Arsenal team has the mentality and the belief to go on and win the title from here, or is it more of a sign that it could be, you know, that 2022-23 season where they were just in pole position and managed to give it up?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I have my doubts, but they are where they want to be. They've played the best football. They've been the most consistent team. They have the best squad. And it's probably the weakest league that we've seen in a number of years in terms of credible challenges, as you just said there, who could sustain over 38 games to really rival them. So everything is there for them. We just don't know whether this group that has never been there before can play the kind of football that would get them over the line. You'd say, you know, if they were playing this kind of football where they were, I know they've just lost, but where they were winning tight games and they weren't conceding goals and, you know, they looked very, very difficult to beat, but were grinding out the results. If they were doing that in March and April, we'd be saying that's what champions do.
Yeah.
That's what you do to win the league. You go to these places, you grind them out. No one will care how well you play. The fact that they're doing it in November and that they haven't won a title in 20 years, it kind of makes us feel as though they've got to find another gear to go and win the title. It feels as though the margin for error is too small because we don't know that they can do this for the next 6 months. So it really is the question to answer. If I've said this on the pod, I think last week, if they start playing well in an attacking sense, and we've seen signs of it, they beat Spurs well, they were great against Bayern. If they start doing that on a weekly basis, forget it. The league's over. They've won, because I don't think anybody will be able to live with them if they can get their players back fit, align that defensive solidity with what looks to be a very potent and exciting and dynamic attacking lineup. But we just haven't seen it all click yet. Now, they might not need it to, because this isn't going to be a league where you need 95 points to win the title. You might not even need 90 this season.
Yeah.
People talk about Leicester. I think Leicester won it with 81. You know, I mean, I don't know if we're quite at that stage, but it could be that, you know, Arsenal might not need to go and beat Chelsea when they've got 10 men for an hour, or City at home, or Liverpool at Anfield when they were really vulnerable. They might not need to win those games. They might need to just beat everyone else, and it could be enough. It's difficult to answer that question until we know what kind of title race this is. Is it going to be a City that we wake up in March and they've won 10 games in a row and you're like, oh, okay, right, they really are here to stay? Or are they going to lose a couple over Christmas and Arsenal could just maybe take, I don't know, 6 points from 9 or 7 from 9, but find themselves clear again, and that might be enough. I can't sit here and say, yes, I've seen enough to convince me they're going to win the league. But I find myself also thinking, I don't know who can stop them aside from City. And as you say, this isn't vintage City. So how much of that is sitting on the fence and saying, I want to wait for another few weeks before I answer the question?
A lot.
I don't know, but that's what I've got.
Well, at the very least, we have got a title race, or it certainly appears so after last weekend. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks for listening to the Football Reporters. We'll be back with more next week.